Hey everybody, Eric King, back with you again for another segment of Umbarger Nutrition. Today I get luckily to come to you from my home office here in the basement of my own home, but a lot of time, or where I spend a lot of my time and take a lot of phone calls and things like that when I'm not on the road, out seeing customers such as yourself. Glad to be here with you and glad to take a little bit of time to sit down and review some basics of nutrition today with you. So we're going to move right along and get into some science and a little bit of this, a little more technical detail than some folks would get into normally. But as we have the time, we might as well understand what we're feeding and why we're feeding it and the science behind it just a little bit. So like I said, we're going to go into the basics of small animal nutrition. The basics of small animal nutrition. As many of us would like to just keep it as simple and basic as what comes in, what comes out, what doesn't come out turns into energy and is turned into pounds per day, we'd like to take it just one step further and get into the science just behind just a little bit more of it than that. So sit back and relax. We're going to go through the digestive system just a little bit and see where your feed goes through and how it's picked up and how it's processed as we go through the animal system. So as many of us know, the ruminant animal has four main compartments in their digestive system. As feed moves down through the system, it transfers down into the first compartment called the rumen. Then it's moved down into the reticulum, omasum, and then abomasum is the last spot where feed is processed before it moves into the small intestine. We're going to go through each compartment here and kind of show you some images as feed is broke down and how it is processed throughout the system. So some of these images may be a little bit more detailed than some of our youngsters would like to see, but take the time and visit with them and make them understand and let them understand. And that's what we're here for, is to understand how their feed is processed in their animals. So let's go through the process and understand a little bit more about how our feed is digested and how it is processed. Ruminant nutrition basics. Rumen bacteria are responsible ones for digesting the feed. Rumen bacteria actually digest the feed by attaching to the feed particles, releasing enzymes. A lot of this starts to happen in that first compartment called the rumen, which we're going to see here in a minute. It's a very big tank, essentially, where our feed is hauled in and stored as it transpires down through the esophagus, down into that rumen and storage tank, like I said. So one thing we can do by increasing the surface area or attaching area on our feed, we can increase that digestion, much as I talked about in a previous episode, by steam flaking our grains. So with a grain-based diet, there's actually 8 to 10 billion bacteria per milliliter of in the rumen content. Okay, so that's a lot of bacteria down in the rumen working, digesting, starting those processes to break down that feed and move it along through the system so we can actually turn that into energy and growth and pounds per day that we need to make our animals weight and make them mature. So as we move through the system, this is actually a picture of actually a cattle rumen. It's easier to see, so we use cattle pictures in these graphics and images. So what you see here laying on the floor is actually an open rumen of a bovine or a ruminant animal, which is obviously larger, like I said. But you can see a lot of the processed feeds and fiber and hay in there, and some of that being unprocessed yet. And as we go down through the system, you're going to see less and less and less and more of it being processed. But up here at the top, you're going to see that the rumen contents, on average, are 88% water. That's a lot of water. So as we talk about the nutrient use and what we need and what the most important nutrient is, we're going to figure out real quickly it's water as we cruise through the system here and through the body. So as our feed moves through the rumen, like I said, it's a big vat and a storage tank for us. There's a lot of organisms present in there. Some of those might be bacteria, yeast, and microbes. Okay, those microbes actually regenerate every 4 to 6 hours. They're always constantly changing, always constantly growing, redeveloping. So as we haul and stress and move these animals and things like that, those bacteria are always regenerating. And that's the thing we want to feed in those ruminant animals, to make that rumen keep working and keep going and keep processing and keep our animals on feed and keeping them eating at all times. Okay, understand also the rumen actually changes as their diet changes. So if as the animals mature, and maybe we keep some ewe lambs on feed and keep them through, and we're going to keep those through the season, and maybe transition them into a mature ewe, and maybe get them bred, and we transition them onto a forage-based diet. Their rumen is going to change over time and look a lot different than it did when we had maybe them on show feed or things like that. So understand that as we move through the system, that definitely changes and advances us. So the rumen environment, what does that look like? It's roughly 100 to 104 degrees, actually Fahrenheit. Got a little typo there on me, but it's actually 100 to 104 degrees inside, so it's very warm. There's a lot of activity going, and as we talked in that previous episode, maybe the use of barley is going to help us cool that animal down internally, and that's where we're going to drop that temperature as we cool these animals down internally with the use of that barley in those hot summer months. Because if it's 104 outside, our rumen temperature is going to be way up as well. Typical pH on a rumen diet or a normal diet is 5.5 to 7. Okay, so function in either way, depending on that feed and depending on that diet, will change us in either way or swing us up or down in either way. So we'd like to stay as close to that 7 as possible. That's more neutral, and that's where we would like to have a healthy rumen if possible at all times. So these are healthy. Actually, this is a zoom in of the bottom side of that rumen that we were looking at, and we'll actually move in a little deeper to the bottom side of that rumen. You can actually see the papillae down in the bottom side of that rumen. That's actually where a lot of the absorption happens, the rumen fluid and things like that. The rumen actually contracts and churns itself several times a minute. It actually kind of stirs itself, we'll say. So it mixes those contents all the time. It's turning itself over as it digests. And those juices that settle into the bottom, into that papillae, that's actually where the absorption happens down in the bottom. And we'll get even a little deeper as we move down into the reticulum. You can actually see on the left side there is still the rumen, and then on the right side where we're getting into the honeycomb shape, that is the reticulum. Okay, that is our second step and second stage in the nutrition, or in the stomach compartments. Okay, there's just a small fold that separates those two from the rumen to the reticulum. So the reticulum's main job is waste removal and movement. It actually traps the feed down inside of itself, and once again you can see those small papillae on the outside moving down into the honeycomb shape that is the reticulum. Okay, so the reticulum, like I said, works for waste removal and movement of that feed and further processing on down the line. Our next and third step in the system is the reticulum to the omasum. The omasum's main job, it is lined with folds and more papillae. It moves and squeezes and actually grinds feed. As I said, the rumen really just kind of tumbles itself and puts it in essentially a spin cycle like our wash machine would. The omasum is more of the scrub cycle. We're actually getting in there and scrubbing that feed and squeezing it and getting those nutrients out of it. You can see those folds in there. Those feed gets tucked in there, and it really allows that bacteria and microbes to really get after it and really digest it. This is where absorption of our volatile fatty acids happen, our electrolytes, and even our water. A lot of our water absorption down in here in this system happens in the omasum. And once again, that rumen was 88% water. We got to make that stuff keep going through the animal. Our most important nutrient is water. We've got to make sure that stuff keeps moving through the system. So as we make our fourth and final stop to our last spot in the stomach here, we go to the omasum, or the abomasum, I should say. We move from the omasum to the abomasum. It functions much like our stomachs in a human. Very similar to how it digests. You see a lot of those particles, that corn product sitting in there yet. It will actually sit there and digest it with enzymes and chemical breakdown of that food before it moves into the intestinal walls for more absorption and more function as well. So it's kind of neat to see this stuff. Obviously, like I said, this was a larger ruminant with a very, very high corn diet. You can see those large particles of corn moving down through that stomach and moving down through that system. And obviously, that's why there is a large concentration of that left in the rumen, or in the stomach tract there as well. So our small species, we're not going to see quite that abundance of corn and collection of things as it moves down through that system. But these are great articles and great things to be able to see that move down through that system. This is another great picture of how those the abomasum works. Much like our stomach, it's a very, very thin wall. Works very similar to, like I said, our stomach, and that chemical breakdown is how it works. So how are these nutrients used once they're absorbed in the system? We talked about absorption and where some of those get absorbed and where they get picked up. So let's understand a minute how our nutrients are used and what process they are used. Okay, so this is the hierarchy of nutrient use. This is how the nutrients are used and when they are used and in what order. So we're going to go through these, and you'll all understand a little bit more as we get down to the end of why our animals maybe aren't laying the fat cover down and the condition down that we need in particular cases. So our first stop, our animal has to make their maintenance requirement. 40 to 50% of the animal's daily calories go to the maintenance requirement. So function of the body, breathing, aspiration, growth, things like that. Maintaining body organs and function, heartbeat, like I said, breathing, and just day-to-day outright operations to keep us going. Okay. Our next stop there is development. So once we have enough calories in the system to meet the requirements that we need for maintenance, then we're going to move up to development. So it allows this animal to grow, develop, well, not necessarily grow, but develop appendages, develop through the system, develop our body, and move right along. So the third one would be growth. So once we fill those two buckets first, the maintenance bucket and the development bucket, we're able to consume enough calories to grow that animal and make pounds per day and things that we all need to make those animals mature and market ready. So understand we've got to fill those first two to get to growth. They don't ever happen. You don't fill one halfway and then get to the next one and fill it halfway. Maintenance has got to be full, then development's got to be full, growth has got to be full. Then we can move on up into lactation when we get into a mature animal, like I said, in the breeding side and things like that. And also that revolves into reproduction. So lactation and reproduction, those would come into the repro side of a more mature animal. But lastly, but not least, fattening. Fattening is the last thing that gets filled in all times. So understand that we have to fill all of our buckets first, and fattening is the absolute last thing that we're going to do. So also understand that maintenance can change, and maintenance requirements can go up as temperature goes up, and we'll discuss a few more of those here in a minute. But also as we increase exercise programs, we demand more out of these. We're maybe working with them a little bit harder. You guys are off of school. We're doing a lot more walking and things like that. Our maintenance requirement goes up. Okay, so it's going to take more for development. It's going to take more for growth. And it's going to take a little bit longer for those animals to get fat. So just understand how your nutrients are used and make sure we're meeting those requirements and make sure we're getting enough calories per day to get our animals where we need to go in the order that we need to. This would be discussing the daily order of the tissue growth, not just over time. This is more into maintenance and growth and development, like I said, and filling those buckets. So brain and central nervous system would be first. Bone development would be second. Muscle would be third. Fat deposits were coming in fourth. Okay, fat deposits can come early on a non-mature animal, but all those requirements have to be met early. Deposit areas can be partially determined by genetics and by diet. Okay, so the concept of intramuscular fat deposition, marbling, doesn't occur in young animals is wrong. However, animals on the right diet can deposit fat early in their age. Like I said, depends on what you're feeding and when you're feeding it. If we're meeting all those requirements early, we can definitely drop some marbling and intramuscular fat on early. That will help expand our muscle and growth and get our animals to look more mature a little bit faster. But those have to be deposited in the right areas in the right time. So what is our number one rule in understanding small animal nutrition? Sheep and goats, we can talk about goats as well too, are ruminant animals. Okay, they are also known as a scavenger animal. So this changes their diet just a little bit. I know sheep are way different than goats, and goats are way different than sheep. Goats actually metabolize their feed generally within about 15 minutes of consuming their feed. Sheep are quite a bit slower, more closer to cattle. They actually regurgitate that feed and chew their cud and take time to process those nutrients and work through that system and spend time, actually processing that grain and getting through the system. So, what are some factors that may affect our feed intake? Well, today, it's 40 degrees and windy. A little bit ago, it was blowing sideways out there and about 50-mile-an-hour winds. Well, our energy requirements are going to go way up on days like today. Feed intake is relatively constant between 60 degrees and 77 degrees. It's a very normal, I guess, temperature for these animals. They're comfortable in their body environment at this time. So when temperatures are below 59 degrees, we're going to have to feed more. The animal's maintenance requirement is going to be up because they actually have to keep themselves a little bit warmer to process that feed. They have to warm up the water that they're drinking to be able to process and move it through the system and go. So feed intake, like I said, increases below 59 degrees, but maintenance requirements and energy requirements increase because the animal must maintain their body temperature. Likewise, feed intake decreases above 77 degrees because their animal has to expand and expel a lot of that extra energy, and their bucket fills up a little bit faster because we don't need all that energy to keep ourselves warm. They're actually going to try to get rid of some of that heat and get rid of some of that energy. A minute ago I said that our rumen temperature is typically 100 to 104 degrees. So when we're getting above 77 degrees, we're really raising that temperature of that body, and we're really raising that rumen temperature. We want to do everything we can to keep that rumen temperature and body temperature a little bit low so we don't have increased respiration. This would help with fans, cooling, rinsing, cool, dry areas where the animals can stay away from flies and heat and things like that. So, other factors that can affect us are rain, obviously mud, storms, snow again. If we're going to have some snow here in a couple of days, you just never know when we're in the Midwest. So, as we go through those, there's lots of different stress levels and different things that can affect these animals. Another thing that can also change feed intake is also the length of daylight. Today's day, we're in the middle of April here. Our days are starting to get a lot longer by the minute. You can watch that sun come up sooner and go down later. Middle of winter, we have a lot shorter days. We have less daylight. So those animals don't want to eat near as much just because of the amount of days. So as our daylight increases, most of you guys don't even know, obviously take that into effect, but the animals actually want to eat more and consume more as daylight increases. So as we move forward, our nutrients and primary use, we talked about water a lot. 88% of that rumen is water. But what is our next steps? What else is important? Water, energy, proteins, minerals, and then vitamins definitely play a role in what we need to do. Okay, so understanding the importance of each of those, and we're not going to go into each one of those. I'm not going to bore you with all the science of what each mineral does and what each vitamin does. But my opinion is the one that is the most important is the one that is lacking. If we're lacking protein in our diet and we need to meet those maintenance requirements, and we've got a really, really low protein feed, we're not going to be meeting our maintenance requirements, very well. It just depends on what our diet's made of. If our diet's really high in protein but low in energy, the same difference there. We're not going to get the gains that we need. We're not going to convert our feed into energy like we should to get the gains that we need to mature and put our weight on that we're after. Likewise, if we're missing minerals and vitamins for key development and key growth factors as that animal develops and matures, if we're missing those, we're going to be missing crucial things in development and bone growth and body deposition. So my opinion is, water is always the most important. We can all survive on water, but the one that is most lacking is the one that is also second most important in my opinion. So what is one thing that Umbarger does that will definitely help you out as we process these grains and as we go through the animal's body? What are some things that we have done to help with that process? Well, one thing we talked about in our first episode was steam flake our grains. Obviously, that expands our attaching area for bacteria and the microbes and that yeast attached to in that rumen, in that reticulum, in that omasum and abomasum. It's easily broke down. It can be processed a lot easier. It's softer, breaks down. There's more attaching sites, so we can get right in there and get after it. Organic trace minerals. We always use a high organic trace mineral that are biologically available to the animal, which means just in plain and simple, they're easily processed by the animal. You know, it's not rock hard stuff, but it's easily processed by the animals. We talked about Amifirm for a second there in our previous episode as well. Amifirm is a direct fed microbial that feeds those stomach bugs. As we talk about those bugs that change over every 4 to 6 hours, Amifirm does a great job of feeding those bugs and making more of them and making more activity. So there's more digestion that goes on, and actually we're getting more out of our grain every day because of Amifirm in that diet. We're getting more done. We also have Omnigen in there. We talked about an immune support system. It helps keep that animal healthy and keep it going, and so that all of our feeds can work and process that feed, and we can get to maturity faster and where we need to go. Consistency of our grains and feeds. We try to do a great job of checking those feeds and making sure they're constantly monitored so it looks the same as in March as it does in August and September and November and straight up through the season, because one little discrepancy, especially those lambs, are really finicky about minute changes. Our team does a great job of making sure our feed is always coming out to the best of their ability and for you guys at the end user. Okay, we talked about Bovatec for a second as well before, but that's to help for coccidiosis prevention, keeping those animals on feed and keeping them going. Complete balanced rations for showmen by showmen. I can't stress this enough. Our feeds were all built by guys that essentially feed livestock. Several of us on staff actually show livestock with not only our kids, but we showed livestock growing up all over the country and used a lot of these same rations back when we showed. So they've been around and stood the test of time. I can't stress that enough. We don't change things just to change things. We don't follow fads. We believe we are one of the biggest trendsetters in the show feed business. I always say we made show feed before it was cool to make show feed, over 30 years ago. Tremendous nationwide success. We've got feed from California to Georgia to Maine, and every state it seems like in between nowadays, and we can't attribute more of this success than from our customers, our dealers, our feeders, our guys that have given us a shot all over the place. Guys, we're just a little small local feed mill there in Bargersville, Indiana, but nationally known, and just humbled by the success that this little company and this little brand has had for year in and year out. We can't say enough about the success. It speaks for itself, and we don't have to share all that with you. You guys have seen it, and you can see it anywhere. But it is fun to see all the kids at the shows and events and winners jackets this year. In 2019 we awarded over 1,300 winners jackets to our kids all over the country. So tremendous outcry for the Umbarger family to award those jackets, and we'll continue to do that as we go through. That's been a program that's been in place for over 30 years, and there's no time to quit it now. So we just love awarding those kids and love awarding those jackets, and love seeing the kids out at these shows and events wearing those at all times. So glad you could spend a few minutes with us today. Hope I didn't bore you too much in science class or didn't lose your focus there. But we're glad to be here with you, and glad to help you out with your projects in any way. And we'll see you on the road sometime. It's Eric King. We'll see you.